Chapter 9, Thursday, June 6, 1776. Hundreds in this New York colony are active against us, and such is the weakness of the government, if it can deserve the name, that the Tories openly profess their sentiments in favor of the enemy and live unpunished. Letter of William Tudor, Washington's chief legal officer, to John Adams. I was stuck on the back steps with a pile of dull knives and a wheatstone. It was a dreary job. First, spit on the stone. Next, hold the knife at the proper angle and circle it against the stone, 10 to the left, 10 to the right, until the blade was sharp enough to slice through a joint of beef like it was warm butter. As I sharpened, I imagined using the knife to cut through the ropes that tied us to New York. I'd slice through the ocean, and Ruth and me would walk on the sand all the way home, 10 circles to the left. Ruth was above stairs, standing by Willis. Madam prepared herself for company. The master was locked in his library. Becky was somewhere in the crowd, watching General Washington parade down Broadway with 5 regiments of soldiers. The sounds of beating drums and whistling fifes, and the cries of huzzah, huzzah, blew toward me over the rooftops. I pushed everything out of my mind, save my task, 10 circles to the right. Becky came back from the parade an hour later, overflowing with stories. She nattered on about the spectacle whilst assembling the tea things for Madam and Lady Seymour, who had come again to call. I pretended to listen. Truth be told, I didn't notice when she left carrying the tray. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the righty, all make the blade sharp and mighty. 10 circles to the left, 10 to the right. Becky called for me twice before I heard her proper. Her voice was high and tight. I said to hurry. You want to get me put on the street? Madam wants you in the parlor. The knife near slipped from my hands. Is it Ruth? No, the Lady Seymour wants to see you, and the master just arrived with gentlemen friends, all calling for food and drink. Hurry! I washed up in the cold water bucket, quickly pinned on a clean apron, checked my kerchief was on proper, and followed Becky to the parlor. She rapped lightly on the door and pushed it open. The new girl, ma'am, she said, setting a plate of fresh strawberry tarts on the table. Show her in, Madam said. Becky waved at me to enter. Madam and an older woman sat at the table, but my eyes were drawn behind them, to my sister, dressed up as Madam's pretty pet, in a bleached linen shift, a navy blue brocade short gown, and a full skirt patterned with lilacs. When she saw me, she clenched her hands together and bit her lower lip. Her eyes were red and swollen with crying. My belly went funny and my mind raced. Why had she been crying? Was she sick? Scared? Did Madam hurt her? Becky poked me gently in the back. This was not the time for questions. I quickly dropped into a curtsy, bowing my head. When I stood up, the older woman, the lady aunt with all the money, gave me a shadow of a smile. She was smaller than Madam and wore a silk gown of color of a mourning dove with gray lace gloves. Her hair was curled high and powdered snow white. A necklace set with black stones shone from her neck. There were deep lines at the corner of her eyes and around her mouth, but I couldn't tell if they were from laughing or from crying. She turned in her chair and looked at Ruth, then back at me. And these 2 girls are the sisters? She asked. Madam reached for a tart. That's what the man said. The older woman sipped her tea. What is your name, girl? She asked me. Isabel, ma'am, I said. Isabel Finch. Ridiculous name, Madam said. She opened her fan and waved it in front of her face. You are called Sal Lockton now. It's more suitable. I forced myself to breathe in slow and regular instead of telling her that my name was not her affair. Yes, ma'am. She glanced at my feet. And you must wear your shoes. This is a house, not a barn. Ruth stepped out of her corner. Isabel. Madam snapped her fan shut and rapped it against the edge of the table, startling us all. What did I tell you about silence? She said roughly. Ruth raised one shaking finger to her mouth and said, Shh. Precisely. Madam set the fan in her lap and reached for a piece of sugar with silver tongs. When she plopped it in the cup, the tea overflowed into the saucer. Ruth stood there like a carved statue, her fingers still held to her lips. I took another breath, slower than the first, and tried not to think on the newly sharpened knives on the kitchen steps. Lady Seymour curled her fingers around the teacup. Her gaze marking first Madam and Ruth, then me. She said nothing. Would you like Sal to serve you and Lady Seymour while I wait on the gentleman? Becky asked. Absolutely not. Show her the library and make sure the men are fed, and bring fresh tea. already gone cold. We curtsied and left the parlor. Ruth's sad eyes followed me to the door. 10 circles to the left, 10 circles to the righty, all make the blade sharp and mighty. Back in the kitchen, Becky took a large silver tray off a high shelf in the pantry. Hold this. She loaded the tray with plates of cold sliced tongue, cheddar cheese, brown bread, and a bowl of pickles. I could not stop thinking about the way Ruth had jumped when Madame shouted, nor the tears in her eyes. Becky took down a second tray and set upon it 4 goblets, 2 bottles of claret wine, and a crook of mustard. She swung the kettle back over the fire to heat up more water, picked up the tray with the wine, and said, "Hop to." I followed her to the front of the house. "But what about my shoes?" "The master won't notice long as he gets his grub." Becky balanced the edge of the tray on her hip and knocked on the door to the right side of the front hall. When a deep voice answered, she opened it. Lockton looked up as we entered. "Oh, good. Sustenance," he said, pushing aside a stack of newspapers to clear off the desk. The room was the same size and shape as the parlor, but 2 of the walls had bookcases built into them. A large painting of horses jumping over a high hedge hung on the 3rd wall. A thin layer of dust lay over everything. The front windows were open, bringing in fresh air and noise from the street. Carts rolling over the cobblestones and church bells in the distance mingled with the voices of 4 men who sat around the enormous desk. One man looked poorer than the others. The cuffs of his coat were frayed and his hands were stained with ink. Next to him sat a man with his suspicious gray eyes in a liver-colored coat with a double row of gold buttons, fastened over a large pudding belly. The 3rd man wore something on his head that looked more like a dead possum than a wig, but his coat was crisp and new, and the buckles on his shoes gleamed. The 4th was Master Lockton, looking like a cat who had just swallowed the last bite of a juicy mouse. Becky set her tray on a sideboard. I held mine as she poured the wine and served the gentleman. Then she had me hold the food tray so that she could serve the tongue and cheese. Talk halted as the men started in on their meal. "Becky," Madame called from across the hall. "Go see her," Lockton told Becky. "The girl can stay here. Does she know where the wine is?" "Yes, sir," I said. Becky and Lockton both stared at me. I had spoken out of turn. My job was to be silent and follow orders. Ruth already learned that. "Shh." "Keep the wine flowing and the plates full," Lockton said. "My friends eat more at my table than their own." As Becky left, Goldbuttons drained his wine, then raised his goblet. I hurried to pour him another and topped off the drinks of the other men. Lockton gave me a curt nod when I was finished. "Stand over there," he said, pointing to the corner where the 2 bookshelves met each other. I gave a wordless curtsy and took my place. The men dove back into their conversation. "Who has been arrested because of the oath?" demanded Lockton. "Fools unschooled in the art of fence-sitting," said Goldbuttons. "Plank walking, you mean," said Inkstained. Shabbywig leaned forward and pointed to his finger at Inkstained. "Don't you turn the coward on us, not when we're this close." "Close?" argued Inkstained. "Do you see His Majesty's ships in the harbor? I don't. I might argue that England has fled and the rebel traders have won." "Lower your voices," Lockton said with a scowl. He closed the windows with a loud bang, then returned to his seat. "His Majesty's ships are very close, closer than you know. This rebellion will be smashed like glass under a heavy boot, and the king will be very grateful for our assistance." The mention of the king caught my ear. I studied the wide boards on the floor and listened with care. Goldbuttons popped a piece of cheese into his mouth and talked as he chewed. "I sincerely hope you speak the truth, Elio. These rebel committees are multiplying faster than rabbits in the spring. They've just about ground business to a halt." "Have they interfered with you directly?" Lockton asked. "Every waking moment," Goldbuttons said. "The latest bit of nonsense is a committee to detect conspiracies. They've sent the hounds after us, old friend." "Have you written to Parliament? They need the specifics of our difficulties." "Parliament is as far away as the moon," complained Inkstein. As the other men argued about Parliament and letters of protest and counter-letters and counter-counter-letters, Shabbywig stabbed at the last pieces of tongue on his plate and shoved them into his mouth. He turned in his seat to look at me, held up his plate, and grunted. If I had ever done such a thing, Mamma would have switched my behind for having the manners of a pig. Even Miss Mary Finch had asked us with please and a thank you when Mamma served her dinner. "This is New York," I reminded myself as I crossed the room and took the plate from his hand. "The rules are different." I loaded his plate down with the last slices of tongue and set it in front of him before retreating to my corner. "Everything is different." My belly growled and grumbled in its cage. The smell of the tongue and mustard and the cheese filled the room and made my mouth water. I had eaten a bowl of corn mush at sunrise and only dumplings at midday. To distract the beast in my gullet, I tried to read the names in the books on the shelves without turning my head. My eyes were as starved for words as the rest of me was for dinner. It was hard to read from the side like that. I wanted to pull down a book, open it proper, and gobble up page after page. I wanted to stare into the faces of these men and demand they take me home. I wanted to jump on the house in the painting and fly over the hill. Most of all, I wanted to grab my sister by the hand and run as fast as we could until the cobblestones disappeared and there was dirt under our feet again. Girl, Lockton said, bring us more bread, sliced thin, and some of Becky's apricot jam. I've missed the taste of that. I curtsied and hurried out of the room, leaving the door open a crack so I could easily open it when I came back with my hands full. Across the hall came the quiet conversation of Madame and Lady Seymour. I paused but heard no mention of Ruth. Shh. There was fresh bread on the kitchen table, but it took a piece of time to find the crook of jam. I used one of my sharp knives to slice the loaf, set out the slices on a clean plate, and put the plate and jam on a tray. It was taking me too long to finish a simple chore. I feared the master would be angry with me, and I was angry at myself for being afraid. I was just about to push open the library door with my foot when the master said, "Compliments of His Majesty, gentlemen. There's enough money here to bribe half the rebel army." I stopped and peered through the crack. Madame's linen chest, the one that she had fussed about when we arrived, was in the middle of the library floor. The top thrown open, underskirts and shifts were heaped on the floor beside it. Lockton reached into the chest and pulled out 2 handfuls of paper currency. "Huzzah!" said ink-stained as Gold Buttons let out a low whistle. "Do you have a man ready?" Lockton asked. 2, Shabby-Wig answered. "One will operate out of Corby's Tavern, the other from the Highlander." "Good." Lockton tossed back his desk. I could no longer see him, but his words were clear. "Every man willing to switch sides is to be paid 5 guineas and 200 acres of land. If he have a wife, an additional 100 acres. Each child of his blood garners another 50. Makes me want to marry the next lady I clap eyes on," Gold Button said. Lockton chuckled. I gave the door a little push and it swung open. "Sir?" I asked in a hushed tone. "Enter," Lockton said. I walked in. The other men did not look my way. I was invisible to them until they needed something. "Jam," he said with a smile. "Put it right here." I placed the tray in front of him and took my place again in the corner. The men spread the jam on the bread and drank their wine, discussing politics and war and armies over the stacks of money on my master's desk. The smell of apricots filled the warm room. It put me in the mind of the orchards down the road from Miss Mary's place. I kept my face still as a plaster mask, but inside my brain pan thoughts chased around and around. By the time the men rose to leave, I knew what I had to do. Chapter 10. Thursday, June 6, 1776. The people of New York, why the people are magnificent. In their carriages, which are numerous, in their houses, furniture, which is fine, in their pride and conceit, which are inimitable, in their profaneness, which is intolerable, in the want of principle, which is prevalent, and in their Toryism, which is insufferable. Letter from Patriot Colonial Henry Knox to his wife Lucy. Lady Seymour was the first to leave, followed soon after by the gentlemen in their library. Lockton and Madame retired upstairs, releasing Ruth for the evening and leaving me with the cleaning up. For supper we ate the remainders from the plates of ink-stained and Gold Buttons, cold tongue and brown bread. Ruth ate 3 bits, then laid her head down on the table. When Becky left for the night, I held my sister's hand and walked her down the steep stairs. Our bed was a thin mattress stuffed with old corn husks in front of the potato bin. I helped her out of her skirt and removed my own. Just before I blew out the candle, I asked, "Why were you crying in the parlor today, before Becky and me came in? Did Madame hurt you?" Her eyes puddled with tears, and she shook her head from side to side. "No foolin'. Did you play or fuss? Was Madame angry with you? Did she hit you?" She sniffed and wiped her nose on the sleeves of her shift. "Shh," she said again. "That wretched woman beat Ruth. I just knew it. She would beat Ruth into total silence if I let her." I kissed her tears and we knelt to pray. When we finally lay down, my fingers felt along the edge of my blanket, looking for the rip that Mama had sewn up with tiny feather stitches. She wouldn't let anyone hurt her children. "Where's my baby?" Ruth muttered, half asleep. She asked this every night. "The bad man stole your baby doll," I reminded her. "The skinny one who stole us. He took everything." "Everything?" I hugged her close. "Almost everything. But I'll get it back. Don't worry. Just go to sleep." "I can't sleep without my baby." There was a stubborn note in her voice. "I'll make you another doll. I promise, but not tonight. Want me to sing to you?" I didn't wait for an answer, but started in on an island lullaby that Mama had loved. Ruth lay quiet, her breath steady and slow. By the time the song was over, she was fast asleep. I waited a full hour until the clock struck 11, then slipped out from under the blanket and put my skirt back on. I did not stuff my feet into my shoes. I'd be faster and quieter without them. I climbed up the cellar stairs, freezing with every groan of the old wood. If Madam or Lockton come across me, I'll say I'm on my way to the privy. They couldn't be angry about that. A body must follow the call of nature, even in the dead of night. The kitchen was so dark I walked slowly, my hands feeling in front of me so I wouldn't bump into the table or knock over a pitcher on the sideboard. I paused at the back door. The sound of Lockton snoring came from above, like far-away thunder. I'm on my way to the privy. I reminded myself, no harm in that. I carefully opened the door and stepped outside. The night air was crisp and smelled faintly of salt. I tiptoed down the back steps and flew past the privy and around the side of the house to the gate, which hid in shadows. My heart pounded so loud I felt sure it would wake the entire street. I had only to open the gate latch and step out. My hand would not move. If I opened the gate, I would be criminal. Slaves were not allowed out after sunset without a pass from a master. Anyone who caught me could take me to jail. If I opened the gate, a judge could order me flogged. If I opened the gate, there was no telling what punishment Madam would demand. If I opened the gate, I might die of fright. I leaned my head against the gate. I could not open the gate, but I had to open the gate. This house was not a safe place. I had to get us out. But there was no way to get out, no way to run off an island, no way to run with a little girl. The secret of Madam's linen chest was the only key I held. Watch over me, Mama. I opened the latch, slipped out of the gate, and ran. I thought it would be easy. I would run straight to the shed behind Bellingham's house, tap on Curzon's window, tell him the news, and hurry home. It was nighttime after all, and folks would be asleep. Not in New York, not in a city occupied by the Continental Army. At the end of the block, there were soldiers on watch in front of City Hall, a dozen or so men standing around a campfire, with more dozing on the ground. One man was trying to read a letter by the firelight, another was roasting a small piece of meat at the end of a stick. Their guns were close to hand. I crept as close as I dared, but there was no way to sneak past them. I swallowed hard and turned around to head east, away from the firelight. The next corner was dark and lonesome. I turned south, then west again, then was forced north for 3 blocks by loud soldiers spilling out of taverns. The crowded buildings confounded me. I tried to be brave like Mama or Queen Esther in the Bible, but I just knew there were hobgoblins a-walking in the dark, looking to steal the breath from a girl's body. I hid when I heard voices and when a horseman galloped down the middle of the street. The horse's hooves sparked off the cobblestones and sounded like a hammer striking a forge. I chased up and down streets and alleys, sticking to the shadows and shying away from the flickering street lamps. I ran. Finally, the street emptied out into a wharf. I had reached one of the 2 rivers that sheltered New York Island, but I couldn't tell if I was looking at the East River or the North. I ventured out farther into the street. Relaxed men told loud jokes to each other on the waterfront. A tin whistle played, and a small dog yipped. The masts of ships grew thicker to my right. That was my heading. The shapes of the buildings and the outline of the wharfs soon became familiar. There was the dock of the Hartsborn had tied to, and there was Bellingham's building. I snuck down the alley to the shed window that Curzon described. This was the end of my quest. I took a deep breath and a prayer and rapped on the glass. Nothing happened. I started to rap again, then stopped. What if this is the wrong window? The wrong house? What if the person within thinks me a thief in the night or a murderess? What if... Country? A puzzled voice called to me from the shadows of the back end of the tavern, a few buildings down. Every window in the tavern was lit up, and the air loud with the angry shouts of men deep in argument. Are you speaking to me? I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. What are you doing here? Curzon stepped out of the shadows and motioned for me to join them. I dashed toward him, keeping to the edge of the tavern candlelight. I have news. Of Lockton? And more. I quickly told him everything I had seen and heard. Is the money still there? He finally asked. A portion, I said. The gentlemen took some with them, but Lockton placed the rest back in the chest. Then I was sent to fetch more wine. The chest was gone by my return. He nodded gravely. Will this be enough to send us home? I asked. Can they get us on the ship tomorrow? I can have Ruth at the docks by sunup. He raised both of his hands. Go home and sleep. I'll take your news to Master Bellingham. I expect the committee will visit Lockton tomorrow. Whatever you do, don't let on that you were the informant." "Why not?" I asked. "How else can I claim what's mine?" "The colonial will know who you are and how to find you. Until you hear from him, you are just the new Lockton girl." "But not for long," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Not for long," he agreed. "Go home now." I hesitated. "I don't know how. I got lost coming here." He chuckled softly. "It's easy enough once you know the way." He gave me the directions. "Thank you," I said, picking up my skirts. "Thank you for everything." "Go quick." When I was halfway up the alley, he called after me. "Oh, there, country." "What?" "Well done." Chapter 11. Friday, June 7th, 1776. There is nothing more necessary than good intelligence to frustrate a designing enemy, and nothing requires greater pains to obtain. Letter of George Washington to Robert Morris. It felt like Becky shook me awake the moment I fell asleep. "Make haste, girl," she hissed. "You didn't start the fire. Why are you still abed?" Haste was the word of the day. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch up. It did not help that Madame was in a mood. "Girl," she said to me as I prepared to sweep the kitchen floor, "the bedding needs to be aired." "Yes, ma'am." I set the broom back in its place and went upstairs, where I stripped off the bedding, carried it outside, and pegged it to the line. Just as I finished, Madame opened the back door. "Why are you dawdling so?" she yelled. "The floor in here is filthy and the banister needs to be polished, and I told you to wear your shoes in my house." After I squeezed my feet into those small, dreadful shoes, it was back to the sweeping, and then the polishing of the banister with soft rags and beeswax scented with lemon. When I made it halfway up the stairs, Madame yelled at me for airing the bed linen on a day that threatened rain. At least she did not call for Ruth's company. Becky had set my sister to scrubbing the back steps. Ruth hummed so loudly it put me in mind of a swarm of bees in clover. As I gathered in the sheets, I watched the gate waiting for the rebels to arrive to arrest the Locktons and reward me with our liberty. We would be given proper cabins on the ship. I was sure of it. No more riding in the hold with the barrels of salt cod. Ruth and me would have a cabin fit for ladies, with bunks and blankets and pillows and 3 meals every day. Yes, indeed, that was my future. "Aren't you done yet?" Becky yelled from the back door. "We have to prepare the drawing room." I shook away my daydreams. The drawing room on the second floor wasn't a room where folks sat with paints and colored chalk to draw pictures like I figured. It was another parlor, 3 times the size of the one downstairs. We removed the sheets covering the furniture. A dozen chairs with needlework seats were scattered around the room, organized around tables with delicate legs. A low settee stood in front of the fireplace, and a mirror framed in mahogany hung above the mantel, flanked by oil lamps fastened to the walls. "Why this room has to be prepared is beyond me," Becky muttered as we folded the sheets together. "No staff to speak of, the larder half empty, the city getting ready to explode, and she wants us turned out and polished of all the foolish—" A loud beating on the front door interrupted her. "Dash it all," Becky exclaimed as she clattered down the stairs. "Keep folding," she called to me. "Not for love nor money." I peered out a front window. The group of men clustered on the front steps did not look like angels, but they could have been in disguise. 4 wore their coats, breeches, powdered wigs, and hats of merchants. One had papers tucked under his arm. Soldiers stood behind them, all wearing uniforms, but carrying long metal bars instead of guns. Becky opened the door, and the men filed inside. I stepped out into the hall and peered down the stairs. The man with the papers under his arm had removed his hat. It was Master Bellingham. My heart sank. A door slammed overhead as Madame flew out of her chamber. "What is the meaning of this?" I pressed myself against the wall so she could rush by me, then followed her down the stairs. The soldiers had split into 2 groups. Half went into the front parlor, and the other half to Lockton's library. Both groups set to removing the windows, prying them out of their casings with the long bars. "What are you doing to my windows?" Madame demanded. Bellingham approached her. "No need to fret, ma'am. We are all called to make sacrifices." "Sacrifices?" Master Lockton asked as he hurried in. "This is thievery. What right do you have to destroy my home?" There was a horrific crash in the parlor as the hooks that held up the heavy draperies flew off the wall and landed on the floor. Plaster dust swirled. Bellingham removed the papers under his arm. "You surprised me, Elihu," he said. "I thought a patriot such as yourself would welcome the chance to contribute to the army." Beads of sweat stood at the edge of Lockton's wig. "How does that pertain to the ripping down of my house, James?" Bellingham patted Lockton's shoulder. "We need your lead, friend, for ammunition. Good people thought the city was throughout the city are donating all the lead they own. The Provincial Congress will compensate you, of course, in due time. I've invoices prepared." Madame frowned. "How is it possible to turn windows into bullets?" "The counterweights are made of lead, ma'am," Bellingham explained, "and your drapery pulls." "This is an outrage," Lockton fumed. "No, Elihu," Bellingham said. "This is war. Even our churches are making the sacrifice, delivering their bells to be recast as cannon. Surely you do not rate your home above the houses of God." The soldiers left the library, deposited the lead weights by the front door, and headed up to the second floor, knocking their shoulders against the paintings of the Lockton ancestors that lined the staircase. I wanted to shout that they should search for the money in the linen chest. Instead, I shrank against the wall to let them pass. "They haven't restored the windows to the frames," protested Lockton. "Where are they going?" Madame asked. "There are plenty of carpenters who will assist with the windows if you don't feel up to the task yourself, Elihu," Bellingham said. "Sir," shouted a soldier upstairs, "we've found it!" Bellingham dropped his manners and bounded up the stairs, 2 at a time. Madame and Lockton followed close on his heels. I trailed behind. The bedchamber was a large room made small by the 4-poster canopy bed that sat as high as a carriage, 2 massive armories, and a half-dozen men with red faces. Madame had once again set herself on her walnut linen chest, which sat in front of the hearth. Why was it up here? Of all the assaults on the dignity of a woman," she said to Bellingham, "this serves the most base. I shall see to it that every leader in every land knows." "Madam," Bellingham said sturdily, "if you do not take your person from that chest, I shall order these soldiers to remove you." "You would not dare," she said. "Yes, he would, dear," Lockton said. "Please, wife, let these men do their work with no further delay. There's nothing to worry about." He seemed to hide a message beneath those words, for Madame relaxed some and stood with grace. "If you insist, husband," she said. "Perhaps you would prefer to go below stairs," Lockton suggested. "The girl can heat some wine to calm your nerves." Madame shook her head. "No, dear, I shall remain by your side." Bellingham gave the sergeant a quick nod. The men knelt in front of the chest and opened the latch. "Deliverance! They will arrest them both and reward me mightily. We'll leave this horrid place by sunset." One corner of Lockton's mouth turned up in a sly smile, as a blushing soldier removed the shifts and underskirts. My heart skipped a beat. Why were dirty linens still in there? Becky gathered all the washing yesterday. The soldier looked at Bellingham. "That's all, sir. Clear down to the bottom." I wanted to shout, "The money is underneath the false bottom," but pressed my lips together. Bellingham knelt and checked for himself, knocking the wooden sides. Lockton's grin had spread to both sides of his mouth. "Would you care to inspect all of our clothing, James? Perhaps you'll send a man to root through the potatoes and parsnips in the cellar." He had hidden the money elsewhere. That's why he was at ease. Bellingham rose to his feet and stood with his hands behind him. Would he turn on me, accuse me of making a false report, and expose me to Lockton? No. He searched through the papers until he pulled out one that he handed to Lockton. "You were summoned to the New York Provincial Congress for suspicion of aiding the enemy, Elihu. I am placing you under arrest. These soldiers will escort you." He nodded his head. 2 soldiers grabbed Lockton by his elbows. His smile vanished. "Wait," Madame said. "You can't arrest him. He's done nothing." "To the contrary, ma'am," Bellingham snapped. "He has put the lives of thousands in jeopardy." The men filed by me without another word. Bellingham kept his face straight ahead, but as he passed by, he cut his eyes at me. They drilled a hole right into my fear of discovery. There was the clatter of boots on the stair treads, then boots on the marble steps outside, then the crash of the front door slamming. They were gone. Madame stared blankly at the empty doorway. "Ma'am?" I asked quietly. Her eyes turned to me, then she blinked, as if she suddenly realized who I was and where she stood. "Don't just stand there, girl. These linens need to be washed. I can't think how Becky missed them. I shall speak to her about her laziness." And then she fainted.